tell me about Zeta more? No, first, you know the Polish family there, right? I'm fine. I'll tell you. Are you in a book? Polish family, you had how many sisters and brothers?
Polish family.
Your mother is Polish?
My grandfather was a Polish. My grandfather, my mother's father was Jakub Sholem Polish. Jakub Sholem Kolish's father was Chaim Kolish. Jakub Sholem Kolish's wife was Malka Hesse Swirsky. So in other words, I'm a descendant of
your grandmother was Swirsky.
My grandmother was a Swirsky, Malka Hesse Swirsky. My sister Mona is named after my grandmother. I am named after my grandfather, Jakub Sholem. That's my Hebrew name, is Jakub Sholem.
Did you give it to him?
No, I have to do a copy of it.
So you never mentioned your grandfather?
On my mother's side, I never met them. Don't make crumbs, please. Use the plate. Okay. So on my mother's side, blue is dairy. Blue is red. Meat is red. You're not a meat. You just had something. Didn't you just have both there?
No.
Okay.
No, that was
So, Jakub Sholem, my grandfather, passed away in 1914. He's buried in Sherazade Cemetery in Winnipeg. So he must have come here 1 or 2 years before then, after his wife, Malka Hesse, must have passed away in Europe because she's not buried here. Okay, that's all I can tell you about that. Now, Jakub Sholem Polish had, the oldest was a daughter, was Chaya. And after Chaya was Fanny. And after Fanny, I think, was my Uncle Chaim, and then my Uncle Isaac. And then there was Beryl, who died in Europe. He was killed at a strike, a worker strike. And he told you too. And there was my, after Isaac, Beryl, then there was Uncle Simon, and there was my mother, and Uncle Lou, Laser. And that is the full family. Now the oldest one, Chaya, married a fellow by the name of Templeman, and they settled in Portland, Oregon. And he must have died before 1920, and she died in the early 20s because my mother went down to look after her with Mona when Mona was a baby. And she died of cancer in around 1921 or 22. She had 2 sons. One was Wolf, and the other one was Gordon. Gordon died as a young man. He went up to Alaska, and he was searching for gold, and he was coming back from Alaska and on a big steamer, and it sunk, and hundreds of people drowned.
This was whose son?
This was Chaya Templeman.
Chaya Templeman, and Chaya was your mother's
sister, older sister. Now, her other son, Wolf, lived in Portland, and he was divorced from his first wife, and then later married his first cousin, and that was Sophie Kolish, Chaim's daughter. We'll go into that later. And they adopted Henry Templeman, who was Henry Kolish, who was a survivor from the Holocaust, and they adopted him in the early 1950s. Now, that is about Chaya. Now, my Uncle Chaim lived in Winnipeg, and Uncle Chaim had 3 children. The oldest was Sophie, and the next one was Bill, and the next one was Shirley. Those three. Now, Sophie never married, but later in life, she married her cousin Wolf in Portland, and settled in Portland, and adopted this Henry Templeman, who I told you who was a survivor.
So your two first cousins met here.
Right.
Was any word again?
I just told you. It's all of, if this is being taped, you got it there. So why do you, then the second child of Chaim and Debbie Kolish was Bill Kolish, who is still living. He just had his 90th birthday, and he married a woman called Bessie. Was it Bessie? Oh, Chodiker, Bessie Chodiker. And they have one son, Louis, who's a librarian in Garden City. And their youngest child of Chaim and Debbie Kolish was Shirley, and she married a fellow named Vic Walker, who was a very nice guy. He died about, it's got to be 10 years ago now.
Was that the guy with the boat?
Pardon?
Was that the boat, or was that somebody
Well,
else?
that's his son.
That's his son.
Okay. Now, Shirley and Vic Walker had two children, Reva and Jack. And Reva,
When was that?
2 years ago. Reva married. I'm trying to think of. Yes, I know it's Hiller, but what's his first name? Ellie Hiller, who came from Israel, and she met him in Israel. And Reva has, I believe, 2 daughters, and one of them is a musician. One of them plays in a band. One of her daughters. And Jack Walker, he married late and married a girl. I just examined her father. Can't think of his name. He's also a survivor, and they had 5 boys.
And Jack was the boat.
Yeah, and Jack.
He married, how old was he when he was?
Well, I think Jack had to be over 40 when he got married.
Really?
Yeah, and he died quite young. He
And he had
had
5 kids.
cancer. He had cancer, and he really horrible death. I mean, he was emaciated. He really lost a lot of weight. So that's Chaim's family. Now, my uncle Isaac
We're going from the oldest of the poets.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm trying to give it to you in a sort of a chronological order.
Okay.
Then the next one I think would have been my Auntie Fanny, and she married a fellow named of Isaac Sherman, and she settled from Winnipeg. She had moved to Flint, Michigan, and settled in Flint, Michigan. Okay. She was tough. She ran the family. Her Auntie Fanny. She was a tough bird, and she had 3 children. They were all gone. They were the oldest was Barney, who just died a few years ago in his 90s. He was about 95, and he had no children. He was married to a woman called Min, and she had 2 daughters. One of them was called Julie, who you saw. She used to come to visit her once a lot. And Julie married a man named Sam Goldstein. And the Goldsteins, Julie and Sam Goldstein, had 2 children. One is Rena, who lives in Florida, and the other one is Sheldon, who lives in California, who we have kept up a relationship. We see them all the time. We see Rena's husband died just a few years ago. His name was Andy Friedman, and he died. And he was a pharmacist like me, and he had retired and he lived in Pompano, Florida. And Rena still stays there in Pompano, but they used to live in Michigan. Now, Sheldon, her brother, married a very nice woman, Thelma, who we've seen a few times. We had our cousins reunion in Vegas, and they have 3 children, I believe. I don't know their children, but they live in Los Angeles. Okay. Now, the other daughter of Fanny and Isaac Sherman was Sheila, and she was married to a fellow named Johnny Sachs. He was a nice guy. As a kid, I remember that Johnny Sachs used to take me around with him whenever we visited Flint. And he was a very jovial fellow, very nice, and they had 2 daughters. One is called Mona, who we just saw recently when we had a cousin reunion in Vegas, and her sister Alberta, who was married to a fellow named I can't think of his first name, but his last name was Prager, and was Marvin Prager, and he just died. He was a lawyer in L.A. And Mona lives in LA. So the Sachs girls, the granddaughters of Fanny and Isaac Sherman, live in Los Angeles. Okay. So now I've given you. Did you give me the whole post site? No, but I just gave you three people.
Three people.
Now,
The oldest three.
The oldest three.
Then
Now,
the only left
the
two.
next one will be Isaac Coalish.
How many colleges do
I got to give you Isaac, Simon,
Okay.
Lou, and my
We
mother.
continue with Isaac. Now the thing is, so we have Shermans for my own family.
That's
without
right.
Mona.
Definitely.
Oh, you're freezing.
Now, introduce it first
I'm so hot.
as what are you, reporter for what magazine?
Pardon?
Oh, we say here. My name is Avia, your secretary, what? From the special magazine, the Free Press?
The Genealogy magazine.
Okay. And now from the Genealogy magazine in Toronto, our new reporter on the scene, Via Josefa Weisman. Over to you, Via.
What do you remember when you were 7 years old?
What do I remember when I was 7 years old? When I was 7 years old, the year was 1932. And I think that's the year that my Zeta passed away, my dad's father. So I remember he was sick. I remember him that year on Victoria Day, Firecracker Day. I remember him with sparklers. I remember it was dark outside, it was nighttime, and he had a beard, and I remember seeing the beard behind the sparklers. That's what I remember when I was 7 years old.
Which dad are you? Which dad are you?
I told you, my dad's father.
What was your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday? When I was 7? When?
Yeah, when you were
When I was 7. My favorite holiday when I was 7? I guess it was Hanukkah. Because in Hanukkah, we had a special thing. Hanukkah went for 7 days, or 8 days, and every day we got a present.
Really?
Yeah.
How come you didn't do that with our family?
Well,
We did. We did.
when you were very little, we did.
Yeah?
What was your favorite toy when you were 7 years old?
My favorite toy when I was 7, I can't remember. I really can't remember. I don't know. I don't want to make up something I can't remember.
What were things that you used to do when you were 7 years old?
Well, when I was 7, I know I had a dog, and a police dog. It was Rex. Rex was his name.
Oh, Rex.
Rex. Rex, yeah. My dad always loved dogs. Yeah. Yeah. My dad always liked dogs. Oh yeah.
What was Winnipeg like?
Winnipeg was a great city. It was a beautiful city. It's still a beautiful city. I like Winnipeg. And I lived on, when I was 7 years old, I lived on Anderson Avenue. And my next door neighbor was Tuzi Dubinsky. My next door neighbor was Tuzi Dubinsky, who is now, he's retired, but he was a professor of mathematics at the University of British Columbia. And he was married to Kim Campbell, who was the ex-Prime Minister of Canada.
That's an interesting thing.
Yeah. Okay, next question, please. Reporter.
Tell us a story about school when you were 7 years old.
When I was 7 years old, I went to the, 7 years old, I would have been going to the Jewish folk school, which was on the corner of St. John's and Charles. And we had classes in Yiddish and in English and a little bit of Hebrew. Hebrew was given just a little bit. It was mainly Yiddish and English. But we did have Hebrew. Whereas the Parrott School, which was the largest school, didn't have any Hebrew at all. And folk school was founded because they started to teach Hebrew. Next question.
How these things
What do
happen
you
when you
remember
were 7?
about your parents when you were 7 years?
What do you want to know about my parents?
Yeah.
What about them?
What do you remember about your parents when you were 7 years?
Well, it's hard to remember when I was 7.
Was your mother active in her accident?
They're
Yes.
trying to say exactly 7, but what
You know, my mother was a very beautiful, sweet, fine lady, and she was a good mother. She was very good to me. I know she always used to make my two favorite suppers were veal chops with vegetarian beans, or concussion with peas,
What's concussion?
like hamburgers.
Oh,
Okay,
What do you remember
and
about
that was my mother. And my dad he was a good friend. My dad used to play soccer with me. We used to play a lot of football. Um, and my father used to take me to all the baseball and football games that were played by the YMHA. Okay, next question.
What do you remember about your Bob and Jade?
Well, I don't remember anything about any of my brothers because none of them were alive. And the only grandparent I had was my dad's father, who I told you before died in 1932, and he used to pick me up at Polk Show every day, and he used to wait for me, and when school was out, he would walk me home from school every day.
So you had one Zeta.
One Zeta is all I know. My mother's father died in 1914 before my mother was even married to my dad.
And that's how you got your name, right?
That's who I'm named after, my mother's father, Jakob Shalom. And my sister is named after my mother's grandmother, my mother's mother, I should say. My mother's mother, who was Malka Pesa, was Monism in Hebrew.
What did you used to do with your sister?
Well, my sister and I are very close now. But as I recall, when I was small, I must have been a real brat. I used to tease her a lot. I remember she used to get mad because my mother wouldn't let her go out to certain parties and things like that, and she used to always say she was going to leave home. And I would always run and get a suitcase and say, here,
Brother used to do the
pack it
same
up.
thing. Raymond did the same thing to me. Whenever I was going to leave home, he would go get my suitcase. I was madder at him than I was at anybody else. My brother always
Same
did that.
thing, right? Okay, what else?
Did you ever have to stay after school?
I think so. not when I was 7 years old, but later when I was in junior high, I remember a number of times I had to stay after school. I once got the strap.
Ask him what happened.
Daddy didn't.
Ask him what's there, you.
What was this? Like, can you tell us the story?
But getting this, there was a terrible teacher in grade 8, it was Corbett. And I forget the reason why.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know why she gave me, I think I remember, I can't really remember why she gave me the strap, but I know she had it in for me. It started with,
You have trouble with it.
no, we had to write a composition. I remember we had to write a composition on,
Morning.
just a second, how did it go? Somehow or other, I read a joke in the Reader's Digest, and I put this into my composition, and she got very excited about it. And the joke was a play on words. It said, it wasn't school that I objected to, it was the principle of the thing. So when she read that, she took that as I was saying something wrong against the principal. So she marched me to the principal's office, and then he had no other recourse because she had said this was a bad thing, that he gave me a strap on each hand.
Really?
Yeah.
Our whole class in grade 4,
Yeah.
because of one kid at recess that made everybody, big trouble.
Yeah.
So the guy said he's going to give everybody the strap. Well, I was scared out of my wits. So they passed around rosin.
Yeah.
And the violinist, you hear on the violin? So everybody got their hands with rosin. This was in grade 4. And we were like trampling.
Sure.
And they were all scared because of this one kid. I remember his name was Franz Pickle, I think, Franz Pickle. And because of Franz, we all got into trouble, but at the end, the guy said, he was not going to, the girls could get away with it. The girls didn't have to get the strap, but all the boys had straps. And they had their hands all with bras and, and they all came up and didn't hurt.
No, didn't hurt.
I didn't get it.
Oh,
The girls didn't
the
get it.
girls didn't get it, I see. That's the only time I got the strap, too. Any other questions? Oh, all done. That's pretty good. Okay, are we going to sign off now?
That's second year.
Bobby Lane? What about Bobby Lane?
What do you think of Bobby Lane?
Same questions to Bobby Lane?
I don't
Okay.
remember from when I was 7 years old.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah, he thinks so good of Bobby Lane.
We're going to come back to
Okay.
So don't go away.
No, I'll come back. I'll come back. I'll come back.
Tell us about the pigtails. Was that your mother?
I remember when I was 7 or 8.
Was the
Not
pigtail
much.
story? Was that you or was that your mom?
Pigtail story was me. My mother used to send me to school
But
with
she
pigtails.
also had the same story, didn't she, or something like that?
No,
No,
that was later.
Okay, what's the pigtail story?
The pigtail story was when I was about 9 or 10, my mother always put my hair in braids, 2 big braids. And then she parted it in the middle and pulled it down over my eyebrows, and it looked horrible, and I hated it. So I used to go to the corner. I'd leave the house. When I get to the corner, I would pull out the braids like this and leave them all wavy, how braids get. They're like all kinky and wavy. It looked terrible, and I would go to school like that. And my brother used to see me doing that when he was going to school, and he was 5 years older than me. And he said, I'm telling. And I said, if you tell on me, I'll tell that you were in a fight. He used to get into fights all the time with the kids on the street. And I said I was going to tell about him, the fight he got into the night before. So we both had something on each other, so he didn't tell on me with the braids, and I didn't tell on him. And that's what happened. Then finally I stopped wearing braids.
But what about the story about somebody thinking the braids or
Oh, that was at school. It was me.
That was you.
One of the kids that sat behind me took my braids and put it in ink. He took one of my braids and put it in ink. When I turned around, the ink went all over the place. And he got into trouble. That wasn't such a great story.
What was your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday, I guess, was Hanukkah. Hanukkah and Christmas, because all my friends next door had Christmas. And they all used to call me in the house to see all their presents and to see their tree. And then I would come home and I'd say, I want to get all those presents. Everybody's got them. So my mother let me hang up a stocking, but nothing ever happened. She didn't put anything in it. Just a couple of suckers. Till I realized that we have Hanukkah. And I loved Hanukkah after. We used to get 8 presents too, just like Dad. Data.
What was your favorite toy?
My favorite toy was a Shirley Temple doll. I told you that story before. My favorite toy was a Shirley Temple doll, and I loved it. I didn't have a lot of dolls. And it was a beautiful, beautiful doll, and I took such good care of my dolls because I didn't have lots of them. And my mother wanted me to give it away after I'd had it for about 2 years to my little cousin Anna, whose mother had died. And my mother felt so bad about her, and Anna always loved my doll. And my mother said, you give it to Anna, and we'll get you something else. But there were no more Shirley Temple dolls because you couldn't buy them anymore. They were special. And I didn't want to give it, but my mother talked me into it and made me feel so guilty. So I gave it to my cousin Anna, who was younger than me, and I said, Anna, you take care of this doll because it's a Shirley Temple and it's my best doll. And Anna took it. And when she was older, she said, I never wanted to tell you, but after I got it home, I pulled the legs off and pulled the hair off and pulled everything off because I just hated that doll. And I felt so bad because I loved it. That was my Zoe Jungle doll.
What was Winnipeg like?
I don't remember. When I was a kid, it was fun to go skating and fun to do things in winter and, nothing that exciting, but it was good.
Tell us a story about school.
About school, I can't remember anything very great about school except that I was one of the only Jewish kids in the school. There was only my brother and I and maybe another kid. And I was so proud of everything that was Jewish. And when I was in grade 4, I remember in a geography class we had a man called Mr. McLean who was our teacher. And he said there was a picture in our book showing a man plowing a field in Palestine, which is Israel now. It used to be called Palestine. And I was reading this, and I went up to him after school, and I said, Mr. McLean, do you know that Palestine is a country of the Jewish people? I started talking to him about the Jewish people because I was the only Jewish kid in the room. And he started telling me some things about Jewish people and saying, that's very nice, Elaine. And I kept going on and on and on. And that's what I remember because I was like the only Jewish kid in the school. So it was different than it is for you guys because you have all Jewish kids in the school. And everybody had Christmas and we didn't. And it was different.
Did they get to make fun of you?
No, they didn't make fun of me. I had some very good friends, some very nice friends. But there were some that used to say things that weren't very nice about Jewish people. But later, when I got older, they apologized to me because they got smarter as they got older. And they knew it wasn't nice.
What was it like when you met, like, Jewish friends?
It was very different because when I was about in grade 9 or 10, I started going to the Y. You know, where a lot of the Jewish kids were and joining the Y. And I found that I had so much fun with a lot of these kids because we all told the same kind of jokes and had the same kind of families. And I was just very happy to find a lot of Jewish friends.
Could you tell us a story about you and your brother?
Yeah, my brother. Well, we used to do different things together, but he always called me a pest because he was 5 years older. And whenever he was with his friends, I used to come running up to him all the time and ask him, can you lend me a dime or something like that? And he used to say, don't pester me. That was when we were little kids. That was our relationship. I was the big pest, and he was the big hero. And as we got older, we got to be very good friends, and now we're very close.
Did you ever get in trouble in school?
No, only that story I told you. When it wasn't me, it was this kid at recess who got everybody into trouble. That was the only trouble that I remember I got into. Can't think of any other trouble in school.
How did you and Data meet?
How did we meet? Oh, you've heard that story before, Ronnie. You've got it on tape. It's an old one. A friend of mine phoned me and said that there's a guy I know very well. He's a friend of my boyfriend. Her boyfriend was another fellow. And she said, he's a friend of my boyfriend. And he's in Winnipeg. And he's been away for a number of years because he was taking up optometry in Toronto. And he really doesn't know many people here now because most of the people that he knew are either married or they've moved away. So she says, how would you like to go out with him? I said, no, I'm not going on any dates with people I don't know. She said, come on, it'll be fun. And if you don't like him, we'll make jokes. You and I'll laugh all night. I said, no way. She said, please do me a favor. I need you to come. So I said, okay, I'll do it for you. So we went out, and we had such a good time, and we laughed all night. That was Zeta and me. And we just enjoyed being together. I'm going to turn this off in between whispering. All the monkeys.
So the actual can you finish the Polish story?
Don't make it long, man.
There's lots of crumbs. So you got there's a lot of crumbs here that you have to take off, Elaine.
What?
A lot of crumbs.
Turn off your recording. Turn off the recording so people get the question.
Tell us about your mother's family.
Okay. I'll continue where I left off last night when we talked. I had given you of Jakob Scholm's children. I gave you the history of Kaya. I gave you the history of time. And I also gave you the history of Fanny Sherman. And that brings us down to Isaac Kolish now. Isaac Kolish married Nakamo. Now Nakamo was also a Kolish. They were first cousins of Mary. Okay? And this was really my favorite uncle. Now, my Uncle Isaac is really the man who brought my mother to Canada. He was the first one that got here, and he brought my mother over.
Didn't he meet Data Herb on the boat coming over?
No. No, he came to Canada earlier from England. As a matter of fact, he left, they all came from Dillman. That was where Jakob Scholm lived. And Uncle Isaac went to England first and made some money in England, and then came back to Vilna and arranged for Nakamo to come to England, and they got married in England. And then later they came to Winnipeg. They came to Winnipeg because of the Meltzer, a distant cousin Meltzer, had gone to Winnipeg first. That's why they got to Winnipeg. Anyways, Isaac and Nakamo, they had 3 children. Let me think now. Yeah. They had Janie, who was the eldest. Then there was Bill. No, there was 4 children. Janie, Hugh, Bill, and Sheila. Now, Janie was Morley Torgod's mother. She passed away at an early age. She was only about 32 or 33 when she died. She had a baby Hugh, he was raised by his father. Yes, his father, Alan, lived in Sault Ste. Marie, and either he married or he lived with another woman who I can't recall the exact story. He was raised more. So he used to see him all the time. The next, Hugh, was married to what's called Mary Yapham, and Hugh and Mary lived in Flint, Michigan. They had no children, and they got divorced in the early 50s, and he moved back to Winnipeg at the time, and Mom and I used to spend a lot of time with him. Eventually he married another woman, a non-Jewish woman, called Thalia. And but she passed away about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. That was 15 years.
He was one of the sons of Isaac.
He was Isaac's second oldest. Janie was the oldest, then there was Hugh. Then the next person was Bill. And Bill was a very nice guy. And Bill had 2 children. One was Warnie, who was a teacher in Transcorna, and we see him and his family all the time. And Warnie's kids, we see them, they're a very nice family. And the other child was Maureen, who had 3 children with Fred Weinstein, who was a dentist in Vancouver. And unfortunately, she passed away very early. She took her life. It's a sad story. And I'll go into that another time. But we were very much involved with the marriage at the time in Australia and lots of problems. Anyways, and the other child of Isaac Hamakolish was Sheila. And Sheila married Murray Thompson. And they ended up in Calgary, and they had 2 daughters. One was Joyce, who later changed her name to Shauna. And the other one is
Lorraine.
Lorraine. And Lorraine lives now in San Diego. And she hasn't got a husband. I believe she's divorced, but she has a child. Am I right, Lynn? Yeah. Okay. And Shauna has no children, and she has since remarried after a couple of marriages. Nice fellow. He's I think of his name now. Alan. What's his last name? Rockford. Something, wasn't it?
Right.
But he's an actor. He was a director of an art gallery. It may have been Isaac Kolish's, granddaughter's husband.
Isaac Kolish's granddaughter.
Yeah. And that finishes off much of Isaac Kolish's family. Okay? And then, now the next one that I was going to tell you after Isaac Kolish was Simon Kolish. Now, Simon Kolish lives in Flint, Michigan. Simon Kolish married Blakenlight, and he married a woman who was a widow and had a child, had 2 children. He married a woman, I remember her name was Leff, she was a Mrs. Leff, and she had 2 children, Harry and Rose. They had both since died, and Simon had 1 son, with Mrs. Leff, and he was also called Manny. And he has since died, and so has his wife died. His wife's name was Laurie, and they had 2 children who are both living. The daughter lives in Flint, Michigan, and her name is Julie, and I don't know much about her. And her brother, I don't know much at all. I know that he was divorced, and I believe it was a lawyer, and became the Babacher.
All right.
Okay, but I can't, I really don't know much about him.
And he thinks that we are related?
He phoned about that. There's no way they were related. Now, that's about Simon's family, okay? Then there's Uncle Lou's family. There's another one that stayed in Flint. There's Laser or Lou Kolish. He was married to also a fan, not Fanny, but a fan. They were a very nice couple. That was my mother's favorite brother, actually. He was almost close to her in age. I don't know whether he was a year older or a year younger than my mother. And they had Uncle Lou. They had 3 children. The oldest was Irwin, who his wife has passed away, but he lives in Cleveland. I was just speaking to him a couple of times last year. We hoped him to come to our Cousins Convention in April. Very nice fellow. As I said, he lives in Cleveland and moved back to Flint, Michigan now. And the next oldest one in the family was also called Manning, who was also an optometrist, and he passed away a number of years ago. I met his wife in Florida 2 years ago, his ex-wife. She has since remarried. And the third one in that family was Patty, who we also met in Florida, and she's married to a dentist. And her name is Hartz, Hartz, Patty Arnold. Very nice couple. They live in Flint and also in Florida. So in Flint, Michigan, you had, from the Polish family, you had Uncle Lou's family, who I just told you about. You had Auntie Fanny's family, which I told you before, and Uncle Simon's family. So there were three of the Polish family were in Flint. And you had in Winnipeg, Uncle Chaim, Uncle Isaac, and my parents in Winnipeg. You understand? Those who survived. Now to go into our family, you know our family, it was my mother and dad, okay, and there was the two of us, Auntie Mona and myself. So there's nothing you should really have to know about that in the background. Right. And so that really gives you the Polish side of the family. Now if you want to go into the Wiseman side of the family, on the Wiseman side, I really don't know that much.
Before you go to the Wiseman, I wish his grandparents were his mother's mother was a Swirsky. That was right. They knew the Swirsky. So that's how it relates.
Relates to the Swirsky. They're called Swirskys. Some are called Swirskys, and some are called Squires. And decide for them.
Okay, so the Wiseman side?
On the Wiseman side, the only thing I can tell you, give you a bit of the background on it, is that my grandmother was a snooker. Okay? And with the one of her sisters was married to a Zapersky, Suffer Zapersky. That was my Auntie Sonia. Now, she was my dad's auntie, and she was my great auntie.
Who you never met?
Oh no, sure, I met them. I knew them. Oh no, they lived in Kildonan. They lived in Winnipeg.
I thought he was the only Wiseman.
He was the only Wiseman, okay? But his auntie was living here. That's why he came to Winnipeg, because he knew he had an auntie and an uncle here.
So his auntie was a Sniffle.
It was a Sniffle, yeah. And she was married to a Zapersky. Christopher Zapersky, who was the father of Isaac Zapersky. Remember, you used to know Isaac Zapersky, who was the father of Morley, my good friend.
She was a Sniffle, meaning
her maiden name.
Sister to
Mrs. Zapersky, Christopher Zapersky's wife, Sonia, was my grandmother's sister.
his grandmother's sister.
My grandmother also had a brother here, Bible Sniffle, who was married to Ruffle, who as kids I used to take you over to visit her. She was a widow. She had a deep voice. You guys always make fun of her voice. Remember that at all? Auntie Ruffle? That's right. She had a deep voice. Well, she was a very liberated woman. She was a smoker. She was a communist. She left to read, and she was very active in politics. She was a tough woman, I would tell you. Very opinionated and had very strong opinions.
She was our relative. She was a Sniffle.
No, she married a Sniffle. Her maiden name was Toko. She was a Toko.
So we're not even related to them.
Well,
Kind of. We
kind
met.
of through marriage. When I was a kid, any big family parties, if we threw a big party, if my mother threw a big family party, or a simcha like a bar mitzvah, like that, we'd have to invite a number of Tokos as well. because we always considered when we went to Snooker, so that we were greater part of the spot.
She married as a Persky.
One of my grandmother's sisters was married to a Sapersky, and one of my grandmother's brother was Bible Snooker. Was a Snooker.
And you never met your grandmother. You met your
No.
grandmother's sister, you met your grandmother's brother, but you never met your grandmother.
That's right. My grandmother had to have passed away some in the late 20s, 1920s, because then my dad brought my grandfather over to Canada, but none of his brothers wanted to come. They were doing quite well. They were farming in Yekaterinslav, and they had no desire to come to Canada. They were quite happy. They were very comfortable. They were doing well. After the war, my dad tried to reach them during the war and after the war. Couldn't find out anything, and the Russian government wouldn't let him travel there. But he was soon established that it would appear that at Babiar, his family. I can't tell you anymore. That's pretty well right. Now, when I get back to Winnipeg, as I said to you, I'll go and see, because I want to get this new stone made for my Leda, because it was toppled. I'll find out his father's name. His father was a Roy.
This would have been, which year? The Zeta Morris is,
Father Morris is Zeta. Not his father, but Zeta was a Roy.
the Zeta, right? Which you never saw, but it would be on the tombstone.
Young tombstone, because it happened, it was Tanaka Mendel, son of,
Right.
you know, all of that.
But if it's Rob, everyone's called Rob, right?
Yeah, but that, somehow or other on the tombstone, there was something that told me that. At least I know his name. I used to know it, but I can't,
So now, let's hear some stories about the people that were named after. Right?
Well,
named after Bible.
you were named after my uncle Bible Snuckle, and your mother's uncle Joe. They passed away. Both these people passed away very close to the time of your birth. Near the time of your birth.
It's funny.
And they were both here.
Bobby is named after two people too.
Your mom.
No, yes, and Auntie Nakamo. Bobby's named after my mother and Auntie Nakamo. No, Auntie Nakamo. Uncle Isaac's my wife.
Oh, right.
Auntie Nakamo. Okay, so he's Raphael Nachum. Bobby's name. And Gordy was named after really my mother's favorite cousin. If you think back when I told you about my Auntie Kaya, who is a Templeman in Portland, her second son, she had two sons, one who went up to Alaska, was the same age as my mother, and drowned coming back from Alaska, and they both had
Actually, Gordy's named
So
after.
that's what Gordy was named
His
after.
mother asked me if I would name Gordy
Because there was
after
nobody,
her cousin Gordy, because he was her favorite cousin, and he was a young man
And
who
there was
got up
nobody
north.
who asked you? My mother.
Bobby Russell.
There was nobody that would ever name a child after to perpetuate his name.
He died very young.
He died young, and there was no, and
Somebody
both,
named after him,
nobody had any, his brother didn't have any family or any
Yeah.
children.
so we named Dennis Gordy. Gabrielle and Judy.
To refresh your memory, my Auntie Kaya, who died in the early 20s, had two children. One was Gordon, one was Wolf. Wolf was divorced, had no children. Later in life, he married his cousin, Sophie Kohler from Winnipeg, and they adopted Henry. And that's who we see. And we saw Henry again last year, remember that? Popped in on him.